It was the Wall Street Journal which said it best of all. In its op-ed this week, it declares boldly, the Middle East is up for grabs. Like the 19th century scramble for Africa, all kinds of foreign powers are picking on the carcass, the newly dead parts of the carcass of what potentially could have been an Arab world. The proximate reason is, of course, the death of Syria as we have known it in the post-Sykes-Picot era. But their ambitions are not restricted to that. Algeria this week raised the obvious intention of the imperialist government in France to resurrect the Takfiri fanatic civil war forces from the 1990s in an attempt to balkanize, break up, and, if possible, take over the last Arab country standing. Of course, Yemen is standing still, but there's two Yemens. There's the internationally recognized government of Yemen, which exists in a hotel room or probably a suite of hotel complex in Saudi Arabia with the dignified people of Ansar Allah, the last remaining Arab force on the peninsula. But the Algerian Republic is the next target, unless it is Iraq. It was warned in Tehran this week that the forces of Al-Qaeda and ISIS that have so recently overwhelmed the former Syrian Arab Republic are headed Iraq's way. And that seems to me logical. After all, they've done it before. In their American-supplied Toyota pickup trucks, they swept across the Syrian border and captured some of the most important cities in Iraq. They hoped then that Al-Qaeda and ISIS could come to power in Iraq, and they haven't given up yet. Iran has said it will send forces onto the battlefield itself to forestall any possibility of an ISIS-Al-Qaeda state right on the Iranian border. And they may have to. Of course, to be sure, many parts of the Arab world were already dead, and the forces represented by the Wall Street Journal were already in command and control of them. It's true that there were few remaining signs of life in an Arab world that could have been a contender. If I sound bitter and disappointed at all of this, that's because I am. I always believed that from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf, there was an Arab world that could be something. 350 million people, a common language, believing in one God, with common cultural characteristics, with all that oil, all that gas, all that water, all that territory. What an expanse of an Arab world that could have been. It was impossible to imagine for those with little imagination how it was possible that that great landmass, that great swathe of Arab humanity could one day take its place in the world. If it had, there would have been nothing that was decided in the world which did not take their interests into account. There would have been no possibility of ignoring what do the Arabs think about this or about that. That was always an imaginative leap, because the Arab world has been, since Sykes-Picot, largely ruled by people who are slaves of the West, and their people have been suborned, bribed, browbeaten, beaten, killed if they decided that they wanted change in their countries. I don't blame the ordinary Arab citizen for the crimes of their governments, their rulers, even though those crimes are principally committed against their own people. I don't blame the ordinary Arab citizen for the treachery of their rulers. I just wish that these rulers could have been overthrown before they were able to bring about the demise of the Arab world itself. But back to the new corpse of Syria. It's not just that these Syrian people, whom I love very much, two of my sons are half Syrian. I have blood in this game. It's not just that the Syrian people will now have to live under medieval forces of barbarism. We call them ISIS, we call them Al-Qaeda, we call them HTS, or whatever other part of the alphabet soup is now visible at the top of the plate nowadays, but everyone knows them. Like the camel, they are difficult to define but easy to recognize. And already the barbaric forces that have now taken over some of the Syrian territory, but of course including the capital Damascus, are moving into their natural form of governance. They are beheading people. They are enforcing social and religious norms on people who don't want them. They are practicing compulsion in religion. And they are powerless or have no intention of even raising their voice, never mind their hand, against the dismemberment of the national territory of Syria. There are Kurdish enclaves. There are American enclaves. There are Turkish enclaves. And of course, the big enchilada, there is now an Israeli enclave 3 times the size of the Gaza Strip, taken by Netanyahu's apartheid state inside the Syrian Arab Republic. And this week, Israel is dropping bombs, which might even be nuclear bombs, on the city of Tartus, on the coastal communities of Syria. They are burning alive, these Syrian people, as they burn everything that would make Syria a possible state again in the future. It's a sorry tale. I'm sorry, believe me, to have to bring it to you. But the question is now begged after Syria. What of the resistance? You've come to the right place, though, to have it out with Galloway. Richard Medhurst is wise beyond his years, a perspicacious commentator on affairs in the world, and not least of them in the Arab world. He was born and baptized in Syria. He has blood in the game too. I'm glad he's joining me on Have It Out with Galloway this evening. It's a dark day, dark week, dark 10 days, Richard. The president, as was, of the Syrian Arab Republic has just released a statement from his exile in Moscow. It doesn't really explain much, at least to me. How did it play with you?
Thanks for having me on. Yes, it is quite bizarre, and I think a lot of people were a bit perplexed by the statement. He said that he would go on to explain more in detail what happened at a later date. And I was thinking to myself when I read that sentence, well, now would seem like a good time to explain everything, actually, down to the second, to the minute. Because he said that the time of departure was wrong, that he was in fact in the front lines and with the troops and there until the very last minute, and that his departure was neither planned nor nor of his own volition. So frankly, I thought that the statement was lackluster, to put it very, very mildly. I mean, we've seen corporations put out longer statements than that, and this is Syria that he has left after all, and unfortunately handed over to these new custodians of the enclaves, whether it's Israel or Turkey, the United States, and warrants. Syria deserves more than that. There are lots of people who even were fans or supported Assad who are actually quite furious with what's happened. And he says it himself that it's an important juncture. I think that there should have been a lot more in that statement. What's going to happen to the country? Who made the decision? It sounded for one second like the Russians were insisting that he leave for his own safety, perhaps. Maybe that was the argument. So it really wasn't clear at all to me. It didn't address the primary concerns that I have as someone who's born in Syria, and it didn't address any of the issues that his opponents raised, and it didn't really address any of the things that his supporters now have questions about.
Yeah, I read like a hostage statement, and we do have to bear in mind that he is now in political asylum in Russia, and no country which gives someone, especially a former president, political asylum allows them absolutely free rein in their political statements and political actions, because the Russians obviously have their own raison d'etat. But we must hope, at least, for further and better particulars. But he's gone now. That form of Arab nationalism is dead now. As a supporter of all of my life, it's painful for me to say that, but it's dead. There's no point in crying over spilt milk. The Wall Street Journal got it right in its op-ed today, didn't it? The Middle East is up for grabs.
Yeah, they did get it right, George. Even though I appreciate the candor, I can't help but feel somewhat sick hearing them talk about Syria and the region more generally like a piece of meat. But that is how imperialism thinks and functions, and we must recognize that reality and that enemy and confront it head on and not underestimate it. So Syria, we should remember in 2009, there was a proposed pipeline between Turkey and Qatar. Now, any pipeline that you build under 2,000 kilometers in length is going to save you a ton of money. Assad said no. And, a lot of people dismiss this as some kind of conspiracy theory that the war was about the pipeline. And I always suggested it was one of the reasons, obviously not the only one, but they didn't even wait 3 days in Turkey before the energy minister was already bringing up the pipeline with Qatar again. So that real estate, meaning Syria, this crown jewel of the Middle East, is up for grabs in that regard. The gas is up for grabs. Israel signed a deal with Europe. Iran and Russia are still sanctioned, so Israel plans on stealing that gas and then delivering it to Europe, which is in dire need. And of course, the Americans are stealing the oil, meanwhile, in the eastern, everything that's east of the Euphrates River. So it is up for grabs. And of course, politically speaking, there's a vacuum now that needs to be filled. You mentioned Arab nationalism, George, and that a lot of people now are falling into the trap of sectarianism instead of focusing on the larger threat, which is imperialism. And it saddens me, of course. It really does, because now instead of talking about Zionism and imperialism, you've got Arabs, you've got Muslims who are fighting amongst each other, which is really exactly what people in Tel Aviv and London and Washington wanted all along.
Yes, although these currents, these divisive, debilitating currents, have been there for a very long time. I remember when I used to do a television show every month. I made 2 shows in Beirut. I remember quite a spectacular and widely watched encounter with the young woman who was blaming the situation in the region on the Shiites, on Iran, and on Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistance, and so on. These currents have always been there, but they are, you're right, they are now front and center and openly discussed. The truth is, there are very many Arabs who can't see past the end of their sectarian nose. And that has weakened the Arab body to the point of a real possibility of fatality, don't you think?
Yes, George, I agree. We can't lay 100% of the blame at the Zionist feet or the imperialist feet, because we know, like I was saying just a moment ago, we know what their goals are. And now, once you recognize what the enemy's goal is, it's up to you to then act and to take responsibility. And unfortunately, that sectarianism has been the downfall, really. And it saddens me a lot, and I can't believe that people haven't understood that after 100, 200 years, because you can go and find documents in the government archives in London, in Whitehall, of officials writing 100 years ago, how very openly how they wanted to use sectarianism as a tool for divide and conquer. So it's not like it's some state secret or some shoddy thing that we don't understand. It's they're quite open about it, and we know that this is a method that's used not just in the Arab world, but frankly the world over. It's eons in the imperial mindset, and really it's going to be the Arab and Muslim world's own downfall, and blaming everything on Shias. I mean, this is what I find spectacular is that you have a banner hanging in Damascus today in the Hamadiyya souk, and it's saying basically that Iran caused all the trouble in Syria. I'm summarizing it, and that they wanted to take over the Gulf apparently, and you can tell someone in the Gulf wrote this banner, not someone from Damascus or from Syria. But I find it incredible that people have the time to sit there and talk about Iran failing to do something, or having trying to monopolize the Palestinian cause, when they themselves will do nothing for the Palestinians. I mean, what have Saudi Arabia done? What have the UAE done? They've not only been neutral actors, they've actually worked against the Palestinian cause. And then they have the nerve to go and fund media outlets and rile up sectarianism to further a Zionist and imperialist agenda. It really says a lot, doesn't it?
It says everything, but we must now look forward, Richard. I mentioned in my monologue that Algeria has accused France of seeking to foment a return to civil war conditions there. Quite a lot of oil and gas in Algeria also. That would be another bounty if they could get that under their control. And the Iranian government has warned that Iraq may again be the target once these Takfiris have finished their celebration in Syria, that they may get back on their Toyota pickup trucks, helpfully supplied by Western corporations, and head for Mosul again, head for Fallujah and the places, Tikrit, that they once controlled in such barbaric fashion. What do you think the next move is?
Well, on the subject of France, I found their collapse in the Sahel region to be quite fascinating, because I was educated in French, and I followed that topic and covered it, of course, from an anti-imperialist point of view, and seeing them being kicked out of Niger, and to the point the French ambassador was hiding in the embassy, refusing to leave, refusing to meet with the foreign ministry for to be dressed down, of course, and then being kicked just most recently out of Burkina Faso and Chad and Mali as well. They're in dire need of resources. Now, uranium, they're not going to find that much of it in Algeria. They're turning now towards Kazakhstan, but they are, of course, seeking to it's basically you create a problem so you can come and offer the solution. And the French in that regard are very similar to the United States, as a matter of fact, even though they like to pretend they have better foreign policy. But when it comes to their former colonies, they're these places where we can really talk about neocolonialism. They're more than happy to cause chaos so that they can bring in their French troops and say, well, we're here to save you from Daesh and save you from Al-Qaeda, when in fact they helped cause that instability. There was no problem with these groups in the Sahel before France and the United States got rid of Gaddafi, another leader, strong Arab leader who had a secular pan-Arab vision and tried to work multiple times on that project. So I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if they tried to cause trouble in Algeria. Algeria, had a bloody civil war, very bloody civil war, and they fought very hard to win that independence. And I don't think the French have really gotten over that. They still hold a grudge, as if they really think it belongs to them. Some of the French. And when it comes to Iraq, Iraq is a means to an end. I'm afraid it's going to suffer more, like it did in the past, and that breaks my heart because Iran is next on the chopping block. Iran and Syria have been the two hardest countries on that list of 7 that the West have been trying to break, particularly because of their foreign policy, because they refuse to accept Zionism and imperialism. And so they will do whatever it takes. And Iraq is geographically a barrier for them. They still occupy it to a certain extent, but I'm afraid that I wouldn't be surprised if we see these convoys lining up again to leave. And remember that a lot of these so-called Syrian rebels aren't Syrian, so they're more than happy to go off on another adventure and cause chaos in foreign countries, I'm afraid.
Yes, and including our own, of course, because this international expeditionary force of Al-Qaeda and ISIS is anything but Syrian. As their own videos make clear, many of them don't even speak Arabic, never mind with a Syrian dialect. And these Uzbeks and Turkmen and Chinese Uyghurs and Albanians and Ukrainians, of course, include French and British extremists. And all the evidence of the previous chapters in this war for Syria is that these people have gun, will travel. And they could turn up anywhere, everywhere, at a shopping mall near you, at a Christmas market near you, at the wheel of a runaway 40-ton truck near you, with a blade in their hand or a backpack on their back, like what happened in the Manchester Arena. So the imperialist countries are playing with fire with this human material, aren't they?
Yes, they are, George. They really are. And what I find quite bizarre is that oftentimes, not every single time, but oftentimes the attackers that carry out these atrocities across Europe, be it in Britain or France or Germany, they're often known to the security services. They know who they are. They have their photo, their name, their ID. They know where they were born, where they spent the last 10 years. And for some reason, they never seem to stop them before they do it. And I can't help but wonder if they're using them as assets again. This is, I don't think it's far-fetched to ponder on such things. And especially when the Terrorism Act, which they arrested me under, was brought in right about the time that the war of terror, as we should call it, was started by Britain, by America against the Middle East in order to usher in this whole series of regime change. We've never really left that timeline. I think it's important to remind people we're still in that universe, in that reality, on that path of mass destruction in order to control the Middle East for all its reasons, whether it's resources or geopolitical in general. And unfortunately, this is playing with fire. And people who carry out such crimes, they are loose cannons by definition. They have to you can't be normal and go and behave like that, destroy archaeological sites, commit mass murder, topple governments. And a lot of these fighters, if you listen to the videos, I mean, I speak Arabic fluently, and I can't tell what they're saying because they're not speaking Arabic. They're speaking maybe Turkish or Eastern Turkic or Russian, or maybe they're from Chechnya. Who knows? We've also got troops coming from Ukraine who came to Syria as well. So, these are assets by definition. They're being used to the detriment of Syria for the benefit of those countries that sought regime change. And it could very well end up blowing up in their faces. But the problem is that it's usually innocent people who pay the price on both sides, whether it's on the streets of London or the streets of Damascus. And these spooks who run these games and, who run around in their suits playing these games, they're never punished, even though they are by definition terrorists.
Richard Medhurst, thanks for joining us on Have It Out with Galloway. It's not every day I get to go straight to Las Vegas, but I do today. Cole Nasrallah is in Las Vegas, Nevada, and he's first up on the video wall. Cole, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
First of all, pronouns are she, her. Thank you. Happy to be on here. Richard addressed brilliantly a lot of what I wanted to say and ask. I'm Syrian and Lebanese and a longtime advocate for Palestinian and Arab liberation and autonomy. And I've been watching the commentary on what is happening in Syria for decades. And I've noticed a trend, and I want to thank you and Richard, from my Palestinian friends for continuing to draw attention to this issue. But I've noticed that the conflict in Syria is used as a wedge issue to divide the Arab autonomy or Palestinian liberation movement. I think there's a bit of a myth of sectarianism. I'm happy to say I don't believe we are sectarian. I say this as a Nasrallah. I don't believe we are fundamentally sectarian. I think this is a Western view of us that serves to divide us. So we speculate and guess and wonder who's actually behind it. But I'm not sure how much that matters if we take our eyes off of the unity that we can build when we focus on these simple fundamental issues, such as, an illegal occupation. So well, I'm wondering if I'm a lunatic here. I don't know.
No, you're definitely not a lunatic. But I so wish that you were right. But if there was ever a time when sectarianism could have been placed to one side, it was surely in the middle of a genocide, a Holocaust of almost 100% Sunni Muslim Palestinian Arabs were being subject to a Holocaust, and it's happening still this hour. If that was not a time when people could set aside the relatively minor matter of sect in defense of humans, millions of them, who were being literally annihilated in front of our eyes, no question about it, able to watch on your telephone as it happens, then that would have been the time. But that did not happen. Instead, sectarianism didn't just raise its ugly head, it spiked, so that the perversity that Richard Medhurst just identified, where Sunni Muslims were being annihilated in a Holocaust, and the only people raising their hand against that annihilation were people of a different sect or sects. The Iraqi resistance, the Zaydis in Yemen, the Shiites in Lebanon, were the only people fighting to defend the Sunni Muslim population in Gaza. And that becomes another reason for some people to hate the people who were raising their hand against that genocide. I don't know what else I can say other than what I have just said. Dr. Matthew Alford is in Bath in England. Doctor, welcome back to the show. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. Good to be with you. I wanted to ask a philosophical question, really, about the nature of world affairs. It strikes me that what happened in Syria a couple of weeks ago was just not predicted by anyone, from what I could see, any expert journalists. It seemed to come out of the blue. It reminds me a bit of what happened when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. That was not predicted, even famously by the CIA. And I was wondering, given your long experience across the world, how unpredictable do you think international politics is? And I guess as an adjunct to that, does that give you more hope or less, I suppose? What do you think about the predictability of world events?
A very good question, and it is indeed philosophical in nature. According to Wikipedia, I am the author. I always attributed it to Mr. Lenin, but apparently I'm the author of the phrase that there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. The weeks that we are now living through, truly decades are happening within them. Now, that can be a good thing, or it can be a bad thing. It's clearly a bad thing in Syria for the reasons myself and Richard Medhurst have just adumbrated, but equally it could happen elsewhere. I mean, if you look at the rise of the Egyptian national movement, for example, and the officers, actually junior officers in the Egyptian army overthrew the monarchy and made a new Egypt very suddenly indeed. Coups can happen very quickly. Revolutions take much longer. They take much longer in their germination. They take much longer to succeed or otherwise, and once succeeded, they become a process rather than an event. But a coup is an event. Now, was what happened in Damascus, in Syria, over the last 10 days a coup or a revolution? Their supporters call it a revolution. I call it a coup. The thing about a coup is it can be very quickly reversed. And theoretically, this coup can be reversed, although the presence now of large numbers of Israeli forces and significant Turkish force on the ground in Syria would mean that it could not be reversed across the whole of the territory, but it could be reversed in Damascus, because a coup is a coup. A coup can turn into a counter coup. But unpredictable, yes, in the form in which the final collapse came, that was definitely unpredictable, and we are no nearer to knowing why it was that the Syrian army stood down, stopped fighting, and retreated and disappeared. We're no nearer knowing that now than we were before Bashar al-Assad's statement from Moscow. Charlie Simpson, I don't know where Charlie is, but Charlie's up next. Charlie, go ahead, sir.
As the leader of a registered political party in Great Britain, would you call Labour's possible plans to cancel or delay the local elections next year a threat to democracy?
I'd call it a coup, actually. This is something that's just broken today, that Keir Starmer, the most unpopular Prime Minister in British history, and that's saying something. No Prime Minister has ever sunk to such depths of unpopularity so quickly as Keir Starmer is threatening to postpone, cancel the widespread local council elections next May, not even 6 months from now. This is a coup, and it's becoming vogue. They have cancelled the elections in Romania because the wrong guy was set to win. They refused to recognize the result of the elections in Georgia because the wrong person did win. They are questioning the democratic legitimacy of the government of Slovakia, of the government of Hungary, because the political leaders there don't accord with the EU, NATO, US empire perspectives on events, and now they are threatening to do it in the United Kingdom itself. I was shocked when I learned today that there was any possibility of these elections being cancelled, and they are being cancelled if they are, because the British government and the main opposition party are running scared of the new kids on the block. My own party, but more importantly, the Reform Party, the Greens and the new kids are going to be the main beneficiaries of the total collapse in political support for the two main parties of the state. Well, you just have to suck that up, I'm afraid. That's what democracy is. And if you cancel democratic elections, it's only a short fairy step away from cancelling democracy itself. Sajjad Hussein is in Ontario, in Canada. Hussein, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Mr. Galloway, it's a pleasure to have you and to have myself on your program. Mr. Galloway, I'll get straight to the point. The Syrian government has been backed by Russia for a long time, and Iran. Has faced widespread allegations of war crimes and human rights abuses. According to Amnesty International, the Syrian government's aerial bombardment of civilian areas has resulted in unlawful killings of thousands of civilians. The UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria has also documented numerous cases of war crimes, including chemical attacks, siege warfare, and torture. Furthermore, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights estimates that over 500,000 civilians have been killed since the conflict began in 2011. These allegations and statistics raise serious concerns about the Syrian government's and Russia's actions in Syria. My question to you is, how do you respond to critics who argue that the Syrian government, with Russian support, has committed war crimes and violated human rights?
Well, it would have more credibility if the people raising these allegations had done anything to stop the in plain sight genocide going on in Gaza. Instead of throwing these allegations at me, I'd be asking, well, these governments, these NGOs, which are more or less Trojan horses for governments, what are they actually doing to bring about an end to the genocide of hundreds of thousands of people, with the evidence on every one of their mobile telephones? And the answer to that is, of course, nothing at all. Some have spoken about it. None have done anything about it. In fact, on the contrary, they have done everything to delay and obfuscate the responsibility of their own governments, the British government, the American government, the French government, the German government, are all absolutely complicit to the nth degree in an actual genocide taking place not in the past, but right now. So these allegations would have more credibility coming from people who had actually done something to bring about an end to the Holocaust in Gaza. But let me not in any way dodge from your question. There was a brutal civil war in Syria, fomented by the Western governments and their satrapies in the Arab world, their servants in the Arab world, who paid for it and who openly now admit that they were deeply involved in it. And in that civil war, like in every civil war, like the English Civil War in the 17th century, like the American Civil War in the 19th century, in any civil war, anywhere, there is great bloodshed and special levels of inhumanity of man to man. Now, the question is, should the Syrian regime and its allies have allowed the army, a kind of Mongol horde that had poured in from every part of the world to cut throats, to behead people, to dismember them, to eat their organs, should they have allowed them to prevail in that civil war? You may have one point of view on that. I certainly have a different point of view. The hordes of foreign fanatics that were poured by Western governments into Syria had to be defeated, and they were defeated. But they're back, and soon they'll be eating organs again. George Constanti is in Cyprus. Always like to go there. George, what would you like to say?
Nice to be with you again, George. Basically, I want to touch on two concerns which I have and get your feedback. We have a situation in Cyprus at the moment where basically we are, in a sense, complicit with the West's intentions, and I use the term West in the broadest terms, US, NATO, UK, however you want to frame it. We have a situation here at the moment where there was talk of Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus, becoming a part of NATO. This was expressed by our president in a recent visit to the White House, to Biden, that, hey, wouldn't it be good if Cyprus joined NATO? When he came back, this in spite of the fact that his pre-election pledge was that he would not join NATO. Cyprus would not join NATO. When he came back, he tried to walk this back by saying, well, okay, the truth is that Cyprus being part of NATO is unrealistic, especially in view of the fact that Turkey is a member and would veto any such application. However, he said, it would be useful for us as a small country who are very weak militarily to have an alliance with larger powers, with the larger organization, to take advantage of the benefits of the modern weapon systems and the training that this would bring, especially given the fact that in the north of our island is occupied by...
I can't allow you to go on because of the hour, George, and the first point that you've made was so important that I really must ask you to forgive me on your second point. The siren voices in small countries, they exist in Ireland, for example, which is also not in NATO, but in the EU, and part of the Western Empire, but not in NATO. These siren voices seek to lure the population of countries like Cyprus, like Ireland, onto the rocks of NATO membership. All I can say to my friends in Cyprus, it is exceedingly unlikely that you will be admitted into NATO because Turkey has a veto. And Turkey would want a very big price indeed for not exercising that veto, and that would be a price unlikely to be paid by those who would have to pay it. But the danger is, by talking about NATO, by seeking to join NATO, as Ukraine found, you effectively become a part of NATO, though not a member of NATO, and suffer the consequences of acting like a NATO member without having the protection, such as it is, of NATO membership itself. So I strongly advise the people of Cyprus not to go down that road. Alas, that's, I think, all we have time for. My apologies to all those who didn't get onto the show but were there present on the screen. All I can do is promise we'll do our best next week at the same time, same place, to bump you up the batting order so that you get your say on Have It Out with Galloway. These are very dramatic times, weren't they always? But more dramatic than most. And here on Have It Out with Galloway, you get to have your say. Thanks for showing up today to do so. I've been George Galloway. You've been a marvellous audience.